Right. Hello, welcome everyone. So this is a talk by Luke Prowse on generative fonts. Luke is a typeface designer based in Berlin, and he worked a lot with Neville Brody. And from 2020, last year, he started a new studio called NAN or NAN. Sorry, I asked you before already. Anyway, he's going to talk about generative fonts as in the title. So take it away, Luke.
Thank you, Toshi. Well, thank you, ATypI and Jean-Baptiste for inviting me. And I hear we're live on Facebook, so thank you, Mark and Cheryl as well. I'm Luke. I'm a designer. I code. I founded NAN in 2020, last year, as Toshi just said, really to kind of get back in touch with the fun of making type. You know, the kind of feeling I had when I was 18 and sort of confusing feelings around strange shapes that were called letters, and trying to get back in touch with that, basically. So I'd like to talk a little bit about NAN. I've been asked a number of times what NAN is for magazines or like one-liners, or even for here. And frankly, I don't know what NAN is, and I'm kind of really happy with that. I just know that kind of the spirit is about having fun with type and exploring and playing and doing things. But one of the things we do is custom type, and we're trusted by a kind of number of agencies, and we work directly with clients to design typefaces for big brands and small brands and arts institutions and all sorts of things. We also design retail type. We launched with just like one single typeface, Nan Weiss, so kind of monist-based interpretation of the work of Emil Rudolf Weiss, and recently launched Nan Fiasco, which is a kind of vernacular type in lots of ways, very strange. And I'm happy to say that Jean is joining us, and you might know the designer Jérémy Landes from Pillow Lava and Digestif and the Velvetyne Foundry. So I'm super happy to kind of announce that here, that will be joining soon. Something else we do is projects, kind of loose bucket of things. And that's really when I think you see the kind of the playful spirit. For example, we made a font, a machine learned font from the Google Fonts library, and we did some machine learning around typeface descriptions with production type, and we published some articles from guest contributors, and generally kind of like to play. So have a look on our website and to see more. I'd like to share something kind of a bit weird. So you do lots of different things, and it always seems to circle around language and then naturally type. So this is kind of something only a few late night revelers have seen. So I'd like to kind of share this. So this is a kind of sound reactive typographic audio-visual thing for in collaboration with Mike Tan, an Australian-Chinese artist musician. So let's talk about generative fonts. That's why we're here, or generative fonts. Where am I? Get my notes out. Yeah, it's something of a misnomer. They're not generative fonts. They don't generate themselves. They're generated fonts. So, it's a procedural or generative design on top of the kind of like the typographic layer. And the one-liner is that it's a collection of free-to-use, free-to-modify fonts that were generated by code, as well as the scripts themselves. And you can see more of that on GenerativeFonts.xyz. I'd like to say that it's kindly supported by the Google Fonts team, in particular Dave Crossland, so I'd like to say thank you to Dave. The scripts are Python, and they run kind of at the moment exclusively within Glyphsat 2.x, but hopefully that will change in the future. So these are the kinds of things that I think we've probably all been seeing on Instagram for a long time. These letters that kind of are transformed and deformed and are modified through often 3D software or processing or touch designer. And they're kind of really attractive and really interesting. But I wanted to find a way to make them become a bit more practical. In other words, turn them into fonts that can be used and flowed and all of that kind of stuff. So I set about coding a kind of system, a framework that allowed you to do that kind of thing within glyphs, within font software. So you can kind of generate and then go back in and edit and clean up lines and remove things and kind of use it as a kind of creative tool, as much as a production tool. There are 28 pre-generated fonts available at the moment, and that's quite a lot. And it got to the point where I was kind of just like more and more, it became a kind of slightly maniacal that I just wanted to make more and more different designs. And every single one is a kind of its own challenge in a way. They all sort of do slightly different things. And for me, it was kind of an exploration. Again, going back to what I like to do with NAN, it's kind of I guess the 90s word would be experimentation. But it's really just good old-fashioned play, and keeps me busy in the evenings when my two boys are sleeping. So this is one of the real, for example, one of the real fonts with kind of a wider glyph set you can see. All the pre-generated fonts are based on Rubik by Hubert and Fisher, which is a Google font. One of the benefits of that was that it already had it has a Latin set, but also has a Cyrillic and Hebrew set, so it has quite a nice language coverage. So when we finally do onboard these onto Google, they'll be kind of a lot more useful for more people, should I say? Yeah. This is another one, Rubik's Scribble. Yeah, so these are all the fonts are they're available under the open font license, and the code is, I think, under a kind of Apache license. And just to talk up a little bit about some technical details about it. That, for example, when you generate an H, perhaps it would generate something like full capacity. And kind of smaller symbols, like, for example, like a degree sign or a diacritic, an umlaut, or diaeresis, I should say. They have their own kind of custom parameters. So the way the suite is set up is that it pre-sorts glyphs into sort of 3 buckets of large, medium, and small. Something you can edit yourself in the config file, and it kind of allows you a bit more kind of flexibility and craft when you're generating things. This is wet paint. It's another design, kind of simulate wet paint, sort of spray paint. I would zoom in, but I'm a little worried about messing around with Visibo. And it creates these very, very fine kind of vertices all the way around the outline, using a Perlin noise to make it kind of more organic and fluid, to kind of simulate a fade around the edges, a blotting at the edges. But if you zoomed in, you'd see that it's kind of actually very sharp and full of points. When I was working on this initially, before talking to Dave, it wasn't really a problem for me to have 10,000, 12,000 points inside a single glyph. But as we started to look at the larger, perhaps 800 glyph set of Rubik, it was kind of important to start lowering the point counts and things, and kind of working with the limitations of kind of expected megabyte size, file size, and things like that. This is Rubik Dirt. And as you see, it's the same framework, right? It's the same skeleton, it's the same shapes, it has the same metrics, but has a different feeling to it. So this is a kind of like what you call maybe a distressed design. There's a walker on the inside of this that sort of walks around the edges and sort of drops specks every now and again, trying to make it feel a bit more organic. So how does it work from a user flow point of view, from a user's point of view? You have your source font. That's your input. And that's obviously absolutely critical. Like I said, we're working with Rubik. You have your scripts, your executable scripts inside of glyphs script. And then you have your output font. So it's that simple, really. You select a pre-made script or a script that you're working on yourself, and you generate it, and it obviously creates the node structures as if you had drawn it yourself in glyphs, which gives you that flexibility as well. So it's not necessarily a question of programming something. Here's my output. Perhaps it's programming something to help you towards your final glyph that you can edit later. So you choose Scribble, you generate Scribble. You choose C camouflage, you generate C camouflage. What's this? Pixel, distressed, and one of my personal favorites, Goo, which mixes two different scripts together. One is, I can't remember what it's called. One is called Goo, and one is called Drip. And those are mixed together. So potentially you have this kind of mix and match capability as well. Like I could use Beastly and make something hairy, and then I could kind of pixelize it or distress it or fill it with heart shapes if I really wanted to. So simply put, you have your text in glyphs. You select your drop down. You select your script, and it will process it. Now, some scripts are kind of a bit more complicated than others. Kind of drawing shapes around the outline isn't incredibly intensive, but there are some scripts that are very processing intensive because they're doing a lot of complicated or complex space partitioning. So I just want to show you a quick video of how it would look in glyphs. So Beastly, which you've just seen, creates this kind of strange, kind of hairy vibe. Scribble. It's the back of the classroom. What's this one? Glitch Pop. Now this is quite a processing intense script. So there's a lot of work going on in the background to make this. And it's super straightforward. I think it's relatively easy to install everything if you have kind of a bit of basic knowledge around installing Python libraries. I think it can be a little bit tricky. You have to make sure that the libraries you install are inside the particular version of Python that Glyphs uses. Yeah, and like I say, of course, the node structures are all in place. So potentially afterwards, you can go in and change things yourselves if you really want to, or go in and clean something up. So like I say, I see it as a kind of, on the one hand, for me, originally it was just like it was a creative tool. It was kind of an outlet for fun, doing some playful things, but actually it can be a production tool as well. Oop. And of course, I'm using Rubik. It's a Google font, so it's also for license reasons I can use it, but you can use your own fonts or other fonts. And here are a couple of examples. On the left is Ruslan by Denis Masharov with the microbe script. Spectral by production type is being kind of obliterated, blobby, amorphous thing almost. And on the right-hand side is Zilla by Typotech, and you can sort of see what I was talking about. These sort of sharp edges that give the kind of from a distance give you this kind of optical illusion of a blur. And what are letters? Letters are shapes, so you can use them for any other shape if you so wanted, for marks or complex logo types or whatever else. So at the beginning of the year, I checked my spam folder, excitingly, and I saw there were 3 job offers. I couldn't believe that 3 job offers had come into spam, which is amazing. But anyway, one of them was for a kind of heritage whiskey brand, and they were interested in a custom typeface that was sort of a classic clean version, and they were interested in this kind of distressed, dilapidated version that you can, of course, imagine on whiskey packaging around the world. So one potential use case for this, probably the most obvious use case that sort of springs to mind, is to use the suite to prototype kind of dirty versions or distressed versions, or however you want to call it. I've made fonts over the years from painting things and scanning things and pouring coffee and all sorts of things on paper and scanning it, and it's a very time-consuming and laborious process, and it has its own benefits, obviously. But from a prototyping point of view, and from a kind of an extra control point of view, this is quite an interesting approach, because you can try lots of things kind of rapidly and sort of quickly find out what's working and what's not working. We can potentially start rotating paths and adding extra ink around the letters or something like that. Now the generative fonts, right? So naturally they can be regenerated, which is really handy. So, for example, I've generated this S, I don't like it. Okay, I'm going to try again, I'm going to try again, I'm going to try again, and we're just going to keep trying until I get the version that really sings, does what I wanted to do. And of course, potentially, with a bit of pseudo-random OpenType code, you could potentially have these alternates. So, if the user is typing, it's kind of, you have more of these variations that keeps a liveliness. And again, going back to the whiskey brand, that's quite interesting, right? I mean, something like this is a very particular kind of aesthetic. So that's the one I'm happy with. And I just wanted to show this, because I thought it was funny how we've gone from Rubik, which is kind of quite a DIN-like typeface, and then it's turned into this kind of digital glitch art thing, and then via the laser printer it's taken on another life. So I find it quite interesting, just generally this kind of sort of continuous morphology of letters. It's quite interesting to me. So how it works. I wanted to talk briefly about a couple of the fundamentals of the project. And one of them is the de Castellao algorithm. Algorithm plays the drums. The de Castellao algorithm, which was crucial, absolutely a fundament of this project, and wouldn't have been able to develop much further had I not got my head around it. I looked it up on Wikipedia just before this talk, and it's a recursive way to recursively analyze polynomial Bernstein, and I really don't know what that means. What I understand is it takes a Bezier curve, and it will give you, and it will turn it into discrete points along that curve, and described in what it calls time. And I would like to say thank you to Freya Holmes, who wrote a fantastic article about Bezier maths, which I'll put in the chat afterwards. Yeah. And so why was that important? That was important because it could then be matched with a point and polygon algorithm. As its name suggests, we can determine whether a point is inside the path or is outside of the path. And that already gives us some very powerful, those two things give us some very powerful tools. For example, now we have the point list of each path. For every path, we can cycle through the points and do something, something very prosaic, like randomize those points like a Beowulf, or we could start making bubbles, or we could make spirals, or whatever. And with the point and polygon algorithm, we could start to do more complex things like perhaps like a gradient fill or a halftone fill, or many other things shown as are shown in here. And those two things together are really the kind of fundament of this project. One thing I didn't add a slide was noise, randomization. So on the GitHub page with the kind of installation instructions, we need to install a kind of noise library that basically gives us a kind of more naturalistic feeling of randomness. And there's lots of these kinds of like distressed or handmade, almost student generative fonts inside of here, and it really makes a huge difference to the final outcome. This kind of smell of reality. Yeah, and that's very very important. Those three things. So after that's what's left, the creative coding part. Now that's the fun part. So for example, this is dirt we've talked about, and we're making kind of jaggedy, loose outline shapes, and sort of instead of just spraying it with these specks, there's a what I call a walker that's walking around the glyph, bumping into the edges and a bit drunk, and every now and again it's dropping a speck, and it's making it kind of feel a bit more natural. It's a bit jagged at this size. That's basically because we're trying to keep a low point count. But of course it can be finer. Those details are up to you to decide, and all of those parameters can be edited very easily at the top of every single individual script. Here, for example, is basically it's a circle packing routine, and the circles have been placed with either kind of an irregular pentagram, or kind of, I don't know what you would call it, a pentablob. It's quite fun. This one's a bit more involved. It's trying to work out how can I make blobs inside letters. And I think this was an isometric grid, and then sticking some of the triangles together, merging all of those triangles, and then running a custom rounding algorithm on those stuck together triangles that makes it appear like it's a blob. Yeah. And these are some of my favorites because they remind me of just being at the back of the class as a kid and scribbling in your notebook and not really understanding half of the things that are going on in front of you. So these were quite fun to make, these fonts that could be scans, actually. I think they're pretty convincing. So features, there are, as you'd expect, miles and miles of carefully constructed code in the background. And again, thank you, Simon, for all your help. Did I thank you? Simon Cozen helped with refactoring the code and cleaning it up and making it kind of more logical and organized. So that was a huge help. So there's a configuration file in there that kind of can help you with debugging and setting up the organization of the glyphs, the smallest to largest, like I talked about at the beginning of the talk. There are a bunch of functions in there, kind of simple things like drawing regular polygons and randomizing a collection of paths and drawing all the paths at the same time. Outlining shapes, talking to the glyphs app API, and lots of helper scripts inside of there that ultimately mean that the final scripts themselves, they're not dense with code. Lots of the stuff is being hidden in the background. Like, for example, if you wanted to roughen a path kind of organically using the noise, the Perlin noise ability, then you can just send the path off and it's just returned back to you. Yeah, things like snapping to grids and turning point lists, discrete point lists into real Beziers and stuff like that. So one thing about this project is that it's missing documentation, but hopefully it will come. But I've done my best to kind of add notes to the code, so hopefully it's organized in a way that will help. So what type talk isn't complete with a romantic image of pen on paper? I wanted to show this because this was launched in December last year, and it seems like a very, very long time ago, as I'm sure it will for a lot of people here. And when I think about it, I feel like most of my time was spent in a notebook, kind of reverse, working out structures of things, or just solving problems in my head. I've been programming since I was, I don't know, 10 or 11. And despite that, I'm not the most naturally gifted programmer or mathematician. So this was just really helpful to work stuff out. In fact, in the top left-hand corner, I remember that moment when I worked out how to make a custom rounding script. It's this series of 4 squares in the top left. It looks like nothing, but yeah. Yeah, so just continuing that vein, there are a lot of different designs, 28 different designs, and I sort of ran through all the sort of the hello world cliche versions of programmatic art, and I thought, should try for something a bit more interesting and challenging. So I was trundling through the internet as one does and found images, and this was one of the images I found. Unfortunately, I can't give attribution to it. And the final result obviously on the right-hand side. And when you make something that's on the left-hand side with your own hands, you understand everything. Obviously, you hold all that information, all the systems in place. It should be parallel, and they shouldn't overlap, and all of those kinds of things. But when you're programming something, you have to be explicit. So what I was trying to do was basically kind of try to understand what the system is and replicate it again. And that was probably the biggest challenge in all of this. I think the one on the right-hand side looks very simple, but was a bit of a thinker, at least for me. So yeah, the same kind of thing. This one's a bit more normal, my style, a bit glitchy, bit techy. Wasn't so complex, but still lots of fun. I think this is one of my favorite ones, because the left-hand image, this kind of rubricated, ornate texts, calligraphic things, is just so intrinsically humanist. And trying even to kind of get that spirit procedurally, through technology is kind of almost the holy grail in some ways, at least for me. So yeah, I find this one particularly kind of interesting, and this was a big challenge for me. In the end, I think the glyph, the original A, is packed with circles of maybe 3, 4, 5 different sizes. Then it walks through trying to stick circles together and sort of basically tries to spiralize between them. So the bigger circles have more spirals, and the smaller circles they have fewer. But that was a ibuprofen in a box, that one. Where are we? So what next? This project launched, I think, 3 days before Glyphs released version 3. So it doesn't work with Glyphs 3. So one of the things that needs to be done is to kind of update the code so that it can work in both environments. I mean, I'm still using Glyphs 2.6, I think, but I'll be moving over soon. I think need to develop some documentation, some useful documentation, because everything's hidden in the code. It would be nice to develop a GUI for the parameters, so you don't need to keep ducking and diving inside of the code again. We're going to onboard these fonts to Google. We're actually kind of in the process at the moment of redeveloping all of these with a newer version of Rubik. Yeah, and something else that's quite interesting is we're working on, can we make variable generative fonts? I don't think it's going to be variablegenerativefonts.com, but I would like to share a little teaser. I mean, it's glitchy, but it's quite fun. So I think we've got a series of 6 we're working on with I think what we're calling is an animated axis, anim at the moment, but that may change. I'd like to say thank you to Simon Cozens for his help refactoring the code, Dave Crossland at Google Fonts for his belief in this project, Hubert and Fisher for their support in using Rubik. Johannes Neumeier developed the website, GenerativeFonts.xyz. I'd like to thank Rainer and Georg at Glyphs for their just unending patience and technical prowess and innovation. I'd like to also thank Rosalie Wagner at Google Fonts as well for her support on boarding. Yeah, I mean, please visit the website. It's GenerativeFonts.xyz. And there you can try all the different variable fonts. There are type testers for each one, and see a bit and kind of get some more information about the project and start downloading things via the GitHub page and everything. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thank you. Wow, that was amazing. It was a mind-blowing amount of work, and some of them just feel magical almost. It's yeah. I'm looking forward to trying this in Glyphs 3. Anyway, so I have one question. Well, there are 2, but basically the same, which is that does the source file need to be Glyphs or like before the compose as flattened outline, or can it work on every? Like, does that kind of difference manifest in the final result?
Could you say that question again? Sorry, I don't think
I guess the question is: do the outlines, the source outlines, need to be overlapped or flattened, or does it matter?
Ah, I see. Right. It doesn't matter. There are particular designs when where it's kind of helpful to kind of flatten them, and that's kind of a case by case issue. I mean, part of the usability of this is that you can create things and then adjust them later by eye, right? Taking some of the weight off the algorithms, and therefore it's quite handy to keep the various different paths instead of outlining everything. Yeah, it's up to you basically. I mean, you can do what you like with it. Yeah.
So does that mean there'll be some scripts that actually make like either different result depending on whether the outlines are flattened or not?
That's exactly right. For example, it's not called blur. It's called wet paint. So it's very blobby, right? You know, almost like, you know, the ink is filling in the corners and things like that. So it's helpful to outline everything and then run this kind of rounding algorithm on it to try and make it as blobby as possible. So with that particular design, it's very helpful. But for example, something like Beastly, the hairy one, it's not necessary.
Right. If anybody has a question, oh, there's another one. Attila asks, did you ever run multiple filters on a glyph? I think some of them were already. Like, can you combine multiple?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you tried?
I have tried. I think there's. I think it's called Goo. That's maybe we can get it up on screen again. It's called Goo, which runs a couple of the filters together. Yeah, is it this one? No, it doesn't have it. Okay, but yes, I have. You can the Goo one kind of makes this. What did we call it? Originally, it was called broken vinyl or something like that, distressed vinyl, and then I applied the drip on top of it. Like, in fact, I ran the drip script I think 5, 6, 7, 8 times, so it really got a chance to drip. But yeah, absolutely, you can. You know, for example, you could have a script. To go back to this distressed example again, the whiskey brand, is that you could focus. You know, you can have one script that's working with the outlines, trying to make the outlines more irregular. And then one that's, you know, and then different scripts for different types of degradation inside of the letter. You know, I had specks, but you could also have scratches or I don't know, rust, for example. So they can absolutely mixable and matchable. Not all of them are. You wouldn't mix pixels with drip, for example. I'm not sure that would turn out so well.
Right. We have 3 questions so far. Oh, 4 questions? Okay. 3. Okay. I will go. The first is, I think you touched on it briefly, but any other ideas or plans for the future with this? Are you going to keep making new filters, or are you going to make, like, I don't know, standalone application? No, I don't. Anyway, what's the future?
Yeah, well, we're working on the variable fonts. The variable fonts is the stuff that's coming up next. Some of them are variations of the original, like I showed you at the end. There's kind of like sci-fi version where the sort of the parts are sort of sliding together. But I think the critical stuff is getting it working for glyphs 3, and the variable fonts, and probably I'll design a few more filters as well. I think it's important to say that the project is called Nan Glyph Filters, even though the website is Generative Fonts, and that's probably a mistake because they're not filters and glyphs; they're scripts, but we've called them filters. So maybe in the next iteration we'll kind of make that clearer, and create this GUI as well.
Well, yeah, I think that leads to the next question, which is that could you show how you make scripts work on glyphs? I think you showed that. If you want to change a parameter, you need to tweak the script, right?
That's right. Yeah.
It doesn't have a graphical interface, I assume.
It doesn't, but you know, most of the heavy lifting is in kind of Python files you would never need to open, the libraries. Yeah. But each script has its names itself, you know. So Pixel is called Pixel.py, you know, and the parameters are right at the top of the file. So we try to, even though there's no GUI, I think we've made it as kind of simple as possible.
Is that part of your future plan to have a graphical interface?
I think it would be nice. I mean, frankly, it's a pain in the ass for me to jump into the scripts and change the parameters, and I'm the maker of it, right? So I think it would be helpful.
Also, if you move a slider, then the results shows up like 3 seconds later, or you know.
Yeah.
And I guess there's one comment / or question. I guess these filters will be nice to work in color. I think. Have you tried layering those outlines?
I have.
How they look in color? Yeah.
I have not, but I can't see why they wouldn't work.
Yeah, I really want to see how they. Anyway.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. I'll post it on the Twitter feed.
Yeah. Another question: how much time did you invest in this?
Oh, that's difficult to say. I mean, in some one way or another, I've been making this thing since I was 10 years old, right? I mean, since my dad came home with a Commodore. I'm not sure. Hundreds of hours, I would say, hundreds of hours. And it's fun. It's been my kind of playtime. Keeps me out of trouble in the evening. It's sort of developed brick by brick by brick. But I'm not sure I could say.
Okay. And another question: do you apply this per glyph basis, or can you apply to multiple glyphs?
You can apply to multiple glyphs. You can select the whole file, the whole character map, and just let it run. Some of the more simple transformations are relatively quick. Talking about a couple of minutes. I'm running on an old MacBook, by the way, as well, so a couple of minutes to process everything. But some of the more complex, like I say, space partitioning stuff, I think the longest I've waited was 45 minutes, and I wasn't really waiting. I was smoking outside and having a coffee. So yeah, it varies. But like I say, one of the cool things about it, at least with working with Cyrillic and Latin and Hebrew, is that before anything is processed, it will read the text, the text string you've given it, or the character map, and it will decide based on the size of the glyph how much of the parameters to apply to it. So let me think of an example. For scribble, it doesn't run through thousands of iterations of scribbling. It would the diacritic would be so dense, it would just be a black blob. So it says, just give it a little scribble, whereas the caps, it says, have fun, go to town, keep going, So it has this kind of refinement level around it. So hopefully it's a bit more automated.
Okay. There's another question. Is there any tutorial somewhere? I think you briefly mentioned that you need to install a noise module, and
yeah, you know what, firstly, there is no tutorial, and that's something that probably needs to change. The plan always was to have documentation, and I'm au fait with Python, but I struggle with it sometimes, making sure libraries are getting installed in the right place, and it can be a little bit tricky. But once that's done, it's really only the noise library you need to get in there, and once that's done, everything is click button, other than changing parameters.
Okay. And here's my question. I was thinking, because I saw like Mamon and Aida's names, who are making Arabic scripts, which have overlaps basically.
Yeah.
And this could also apply to connected Latin scripts or Devanagari scripts that overlaps always. And do the filters, I guess some of them don't play necessarily nice with overlapping structures?
No, I guess it depends on what it is, right? If it's an infill, it's kind of okay-ish. But no, I think it's a short answer. I think maybe you'd need to do something a bit more custom, like maybe limiting the action to kind of like the central 90% of the font, or I don't know, some particular custom solution. But no, you're right. If they overlap, it's a bit tricky.
Yeah, or that might give you new ideas.
Yeah, and also, I mean, all of these fonts have been generated on Rubik Black, so there's a lot of like ink on the page to play with. What am I saying? I'm saying that if the font is like, say, like a light sans serif, for example, some of the results can be a bit fruity because it's kind of it's requiring a bit more space to play. So that's when you need to kind of go in and change the custom parameters and things. So, for example, if you're trying to pack circles into a thin font, then it's just not going to work, right? I mean, inherently. Unless you change the circles to be very small.
Yeah. And another questions, do you have any like real use examples already?
I don't. I've spoken to a lot of people over email, but yeah, that's something I think probably, again, talking about what's next is to kind of like accumulate these. I think once it's on we're onboarding it onto Google Fonts at the moment. I think once it's onto Google Fonts, then it's it's just there'll be a lot more examples coming through.
And Aida says, well, actually, I don't quite know what this means. In the chat, Aida says, would that kind of limiting be somewhat doable for someone who's comfortable in Python? Overlap. Okay, I guess I already touched on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's everything.
Yeah, I think we caught up on everything.
I would say we're at NAN. We're launching a kind of super fun new project in a couple of weeks. So if you're not following us already on Twitter or Instagram, then jump on. I'm really looking forward to sharing this. It's without giving everything away. It's a game, so something different again.
Yep.
Should be some fun.
It's time to wrap up this room. If you want to continue the discussion, I think, well, at least I will be going back to the Hangout room, and yeah, we can keep on the discussion there. So thank you again, Luke, and thanks everyone for listening. Yeah,
thank you, Toshi.
That was Luke Prowse. Yeah. All right. See you, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.